The title of our book today is called The Underground Railroad. Chapter 1, North to Freedom. William Wells Brown was very cold and very hungry. It was January 1834, and he had been walking for days. He had been enslaved for 21 years, but had escaped from his enslavers as they got off a riverboat in Cincinnati, Ohio. Ohio was a free state, but William knew he wasn't safe yet. If he was caught, he could still be sent back to enslavers. He planned to make his way north, all the way to Canada, where slavery was illegal. He traveled only at night, using the North Star as a guide, and he stayed hidden in the woods. He had no coat, and he had run out of food. The roads were covered with ice, and William was freezing. William knew he needed help. He hid behind some logs at the side of the road and hoped that a safe, friendly person would pass by. When William saw an old white man leading a horse and wearing a wide-brimmed hat, something told him that the man could help. William was right. The man was part of the Underground Railroad. He hid William in his covered wagon and drove him to his house. The man's wife fed William and gave him something hot to drink. William came down with a fever, and for about 2 weeks the man and his wife cared for William. When William was well and rested, they gave him new boots and other clothing so he could continue his journey to Canada. However, when he reached Cleveland, Ohio, he felt safe. There, he found a job and became part of the Underground Railroad, helping other people gain freedom. Chapter 2, Risky System. Enslaved people often lived in terrible conditions on large farms in the South called plantations. Many enslaved people tried to escape these conditions. Abolitionists, people who believed slavery was wrong, helped escaping people move from slave states to free states in the northern part of the United States. As early as 1786, George Washington wrote that a group of people had helped someone he enslaved escape. In the early 1800s, abolitionists in several states created systems of safe people and houses to help enslaved people leave their enslavers and travel north. By the 1830s, people started calling these escape operations the Underground Railroad. More than 3,000 people are known to have worked along the Underground Railroad, helping enslaved people travel. Both black and white abolitionists gave people food, money, clothing, and shelter. If escaping people reached a free state, according to the law, they were free. However, they were not always safe. The Fugitive Slave Act was a law passed in 1793. The law allowed Southern enslavers and those paid to search for escapees to come to northern states to capture people who escaped slavery. Helping or hiding an escapee was a crime, even in the North. People who helped those escaping slavery could be punished with a $1,000 fine and 6 months in jail. Those who were caught would be beaten, returned to slavery, or even killed. Those northern states did not practice slavery. Many people in the North did not think slavery was wrong. Some cities, such as New York City, were considered pro-slavery. Many people in the North would turn in escapees to people hunting them or to the government. Enslavers might offer a reward to the person who found an escapee. The Underground Railroad was illegal. However, many abolitionists believed that it was worth the risk to help those escaping slavery. Some connected their work to their religious beliefs. Levi Coffin was an abolitionist who helped more than 2,000 people escape on the Underground Railroad. Though he had grown up in North Carolina, a slave state, Coffin believed that slavery was against the teachings of Christianity. He felt that it was his duty to help people, no matter what the consequences might be. Stories of slavery. William Still was born in New Jersey in 1821. Both of his parents had been enslaved in Maryland. In 1844, Still moved to Pennsylvania, where he began working with the Underground Railroad. He helped at least 60 people escape slavery. He kept records of each person he helped on the Underground Railroad, and in 1872 he published a book of their stories. He became known as the father of the Underground Railroad. Escaping slavery. Everything about the Underground Railroad was set up to be a secret. People working with the Underground Railroad used railroad language so others wouldn't know what they were talking about. They called escaping people passengers or cargo. Guides were called conductors, and the safe houses were called stations. The people at safe houses were station masters, and the paths the escapees followed were called routes or lines. In southern states, there were no regular paths or routes. They would be too easy for those searching for escapees to find. In the north, people escaping could use more regular routes. However, conductors and station masters usually didn't know many other conductors and station masters. They might know only a few other local stations and conductors. Most enslaved people planned their escapes and traveled on their own. They made their way on unmarked paths, mostly on foot and at night. They used the North Star as a guide to bring them farther north. They often didn't know about the Underground Railroad when they escaped. Instead, they might come across conductors along the way, as William Wells Brown did. Hiding out. Not everyone who escaped slavery headed north on the Underground Railroad. Some went into wilderness regions where they joined communities of other people who had escaped slavery. An area on the border of Virginia and North Carolina, known as the Great Dismal Swamp, sheltered some of these communities. Wild animals, water, and tangled trees kept away people looking for escapees. Those who escaped slavery lived in the swamp and built lives for themselves. After slavery ended in the United States, most people came out of these communities. They no longer needed to hide. Other times, conductors might plan and lead escapes. They would lead the way to houses or barns where people could rest and hide. The station master might give them warm shoes or other clothes. In some cases, someone would go ahead in the next stop with a message for the station master there. People would usually travel between 10 and 20 miles from station to station. The farther from slave states people traveled, the safer they felt. People escaping slavery could live somewhat freely in North states, especially those close to Canada. If they wanted to be truly free, though, they would have to make it across the Canadian border. In Canada, slavery was illegal, and the Fugitive Slave Act did not apply. Many enslaved people made it their goal to follow the Underground Railroad all the way to Canada. Walking to Canada. Henry Bibb was an enslaved man in Kentucky who escaped in 1837. He saved his money until he had $2.50. Then he managed to get a new suit. The new clothes would keep him from being recognized as an enslaved person. Bibb followed the North Star at night and made his way to Canada, where he lived in freedom. When he told his journey later, he said that he had been very afraid. He thought he could be caught at any moment. However, he kept walking. The knowledge that he was leaving a land of slavery gave him courage. Back to the South. Sometimes people who had already escaped slavery risked their lives to go back to the South and help others. Harriet Tubman was one of the best known conductors of the Underground Railroad. She escaped her Maryland plantation in 1849. With the help of the Underground Railroad, she traveled 90 miles north to freedom in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Harriet wanted to help others escape as well. She made several trips back to Maryland and helped about 70 other people become free. John Parker, who also escaped slavery and went back to help others. He had escaped slavery in Alabama and went to Ohio, a free state. There, he worked with abolitionist preacher John Rankin to help others escape slavery. Rankin had a house on the banks of the Ohio River. Kentucky, a slave state, was on one side of the river. Ohio was on the other. Parker would travel from Ohio to Kentucky and sneak onto farms to rescue enslaved people. Even though he was free, this was very risky. He could easily be captured by people who would not care that he was free. Still, Parker brought many enslaved people up the Ohio River from Kentucky. Rankin would stand in front of his house and signal with a light when it was safe to cross. Those waiting on the other side of the river would then wade or swim across. From 1822 to 1865, the Rankin House sheltered up to 2,000 people traveling on the Underground Railroad. The end of the line. In 1861, the Civil War broke out between the North and South. The North wanted to bring an end to slavery, while the South fought to keep it. During the war, the Underground Railroad mostly shut down. New government rules made it harder for enslavers to take back those who had escaped. People who escaped could join the army to fight for the North, so they only had to make it to the nearest army camp to find safety. Abolitionists and escapees could now fight openly on the battlefield rather than in secret for the cause that they believed in. The Underground Railroad was a huge operation that included men and women from all classes, jobs, and backgrounds. In many ways, the operation was successful. Some historians say that between 1810 and 1850, the Underground Railroad moved about 100,000 people along the road to freedom. However, there were millions more enslaved people in the South during the 19th century. The Underground Railroad did not bring an end to slavery. However, it helped weaken the system and brought hope to thousands of enslaved people and abolitionists. The end.